Hey everyone, in this video we're going to cover how to use Quarto, a tool for reproducible analyses with R programming. In particular, we're going to learn about a couple of different formats we can render to when making Quarto reports, specifically HTML and Word document reports. We'll learn about what's called Markdown syntax, which allows us to do simple text formatting, things like bolding, italicizing of text, including headers or hyperlinks, things like that. We'll look at how we can integrate executable code with simple text, like written explanations using what are called code chunks. We'll look at how we can customize the behavior of these blocks of code, these code chunks, using what are called code chunk options. And then we will look at how we can include visualizations or graphics and nicely displayed tables directly in Quarto reports. So first thing, go ahead and open up RStudio, whether it be your local version of RStudio Desktop or RStudio in a cloud-based version, okay, like Posit Workbench. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new Quarto document to start. So to do so, we click File, New File, Quarto document. We're going to just keep the defaults here and click Create. And this shows us a template Quarto document for making HTML reports with Quarto. The top part of this Quarto document is called the YAML, which stands for Yet Another Markup Language. This allows us to specify high-level parameters that control aspects about our report. Here, it's just giving us the title and the output format, HTML. Okay, so for example, in the title, we could say something like Introduction to Quarto. Now let's render or compile the report by clicking the render button. Okay, and we can save the file. It will prompt us to save the file once we hit render. You'll notice that when the file name is red with an asterisk here, that indicates that there are unsaved changes. So one way to save the document is to either click the floppy disk icon here or to click render. And when we render, it asks for a file name. You can save your file anywhere that's most convenient where you can easily find it again. Sometimes that's just your home directory. Sometimes that's in a folder you made in your home directory. Okay. Here I'm going to save it in this completed activities folder, and I'm going to call this Quarto-activity. There's not too many constraints on file names for Quarto documents. The main thing I would suggest is not using spaces or other special characters like periods in the file name. Usually it doesn't cause you much issues anyways, but there's weird edge cases where a space in the file name I've noticed can cause an obscure error sometimes for students. So we're going to do Quarto-activity here. Click Save. Now it's rendering. You can see the stop sign. It's compiling the document. Okay, and it opens up the rendered report. So here what we can see is we have the title of the document, okay, a header, some simple text with a clickable URL, and then it shows an example of some executed R code integrated directly in the report. So here's the compiled report. And if we click back on RStudio, here we can see the raw document. Okay. If yours looks slightly different, make sure you're on the source version of the editor rather than the visual editor. Okay. The visual editor is just a way to look at your raw document with some of the things pre-compiled. Some people find this easier. For this course, I would strongly recommend, and what I will be using is the source view of the editor. Okay. So once you have it on source, it should look just like this. So we can see things like the title was specified via the title field in the YAML. We have headers created in our document, like Quarto running code. Those were created with these pound signs. Okay, that's part of what we call markdown syntax, which we'll talk about more in just a bit. All right. So we created an HTML document by default, but we can also create other types of documents as well. And let's see. So let's look at next how the Quarto document looks when we render to Microsoft Word. So if we change the HTML option in the format field to DOCX, okay, being cognizant or careful of a single space here needing to be to the left of DOCX, and this is case sensitive. DOCX specifies a Word report. So if we render this, this will automatically produce a Word document for this report, which we can view by downloading this, opening up this downloaded file here. Okay. If you're running RStudio locally, you can likely already see that Word document just by opening it up yourself. Okay, so to show that, let me share this. Okay, so the shared, the Microsoft Word report has the same exact content as the HTML report, but notice how it's now in this editable Word document. Okay, so we have still headers, still a title, executed R code, okay, but now it's just in this Microsoft Word format. So that can be helpful if you have a collaborator or somebody you're making the report for who's possibly more interested in a Word document as opposed to HTML. Okay, so for example, one of my first projects in graduate school, my collaborator, a professor in genetics, who I was analyzing some genetics data for, really liked working in Word documents. And so when she gave me the data to analyze and make a report for from our study, I used Quarto to make a Word document report. Okay. Benefits of Word are that you can edit the file and restyle things and save it, run spell check more easily directly in it. Just to get all the benefits of Microsoft Word, right? And you can open this up in Google Docs and get benefits of Google Docs too. There's benefits to HTML documents though as well. So HTML documents can allow us to have interactive visualizations and more complex styling in our report. Okay. So let's look back at the HTML version of the document. Let's change that back to HTML, re-render this, okay, and look at the HTML report again. All right. So for this semester, we'll be using the HTML format for all activities and assignments. But note that there are also other formats like Word we just saw, and PDF is the other most common format type. That typically gives people issues out of the box with R because you need a LaTeX installation available to RStudio, properly connected to RStudio to use that format. So we won't be looking at LaTeX or the PDF format this semester. We'll just be focusing on HTML. So first thing, let's talk about Markdown syntax that we can use in Quarto documents. Markdown allows us to do basic things, and it's technically its own programming language. It's what we call markup language, which allows us to implement simple text formatting. So for example, we can create first level headers and documents or reports for Quarto using a single pound sign followed by a single space. Okay, and it's important you have that single space. A second level header, which is one step lower in the hierarchy of headers, using 2 pound signs, 3 pound signs for a third level header, and so on. So you can keep going lower and lower in the hierarchy of headers. Okay, so let's just see, making our own header here to start. We have this template Quarto content here. Let's get rid of the Quarto heading on down. So we'll keep the YAML, but let's get rid of the Quarto heading on down and just delete that. Okay. And then what we're going to do is make a first level header, calling this something like section 1. Okay. Here we introduce, can we say something maybe like that? Feel free to get creative. And then we can have subsection 1.1. Okay, and we can have a subsection, something like that. Okay, so if we render this, here's our raw Quarto document. If we render or compile our report, we will see that we have these hierarchical headers, okay, where for HTML reports, these are differentiated from each other, the hierarchy, mostly via the font size. Okay. So these look slightly different in appearance depending on your output format, whether it's HTML, Word, or PDF, but this is how it looks for HTML. So that's one thing we can do with Markdown syntax is making headers. Another thing we can do is make clickable links or URLs. So if we have a URL that we want to show up as clickable, we can enclose it in a less than and a greater than symbol. If we want to have a linked or clickable phrase, we put that phrase in square brackets and then the URL in parentheses immediately following the square brackets with no spaces in between. And Markdown views including external images or GIFs as very similar to clickable phrases or URLs. So the syntax is nearly the same, the way in which we include images with Markdown, or one way we can. So we have an optional caption for the included image, and then we just need to give a file path or properly constructed URL to the image here in parentheses. So let's just see how we can include a hyperlink to the Google homepage here. So we can say something like when coding in R, Google is a great resource. So here's what we want to show up as a clickable phrase, and then here's our clickable URL. So we can render this. Look at our report here, and that takes us to the Google homepage if we click on this. Okay. All right, so next, let's see how we can do a few more basic or simple text formatting things with Markdown. We can include italicized phrases by enclosing them in a single asterisk, bolded phrases with a double asterisk, what's called a code style, which allows us to kind of differentiate or signify something as a little bit special when we refer to it. Most commonly, this is done when people say things like, we're using the tidyverse package, and they might put tidyverse in that code style. Code style is just slightly different font, typically sometimes has like some highlighting, like grayish highlighting like this, or colored highlighting. And we do this by enclosing a word or phrase in single backticks. So the backtick is immediately to the left of the one on your keyboard. Not a button you use very often, probably. And if you want to get a bit mathy, you can have superscripts or exponents by enclosing something in the caret symbol, or subscripts, okay, by enclosing something in the tilde. Right? And the tilde is also found immediately to the left of the one on the keyboard. All right. So this is a good point to try this on your own. Okay, for this you tried part. So try to include an italicized, bolded, code-styled word, and then also a superscript and subscript in the document. Okay. So maybe pause your video, try this out on your own, and then resume playing and we'll look at it together. All right, so hopefully you had some time to try this on your own. You can say something like, we can italicize it is really important. Um, okay, so notice we can use triple asterisks will give us a bolded and italicized phrase. Use code style to use our packages like the tidyverse or ggplot2 and also get mathy showing now to. So think about this. If we have 2 caret caret 3, that should equal 2 to the third power, which is 2 cubed or 8. Or we can use subscripts for things like regression predictors. Let's see how this looks when we render this. All right, nice. Bolded, italicized, bolded and italicized, code style. Okay, so you'll notice in HTML documents, the code style makes the text purple with this grayish background and a little different font. That's a little bit different than how Word documents handle the code style. This docx document here for the introduction to Quarto activity was made with Quarto. So that's how the code style looks when you're rendering to Word for the Quarto document. Okay, but a little bit different than HTML. And you'll see we get the exponent, superscript, and the subscripts. Okay. All right. And for those who are familiar with LaTeX, the math markup language, you don't need to know LaTeX at all for this semester, but just know that LaTeX syntax is allowed in Quarto documents as well. You can essentially intermix LaTeX and Markdown syntax if you're familiar with LaTeX. If you're not, you can just disregard that and not worry about it. All right, so at this point, you might understandably be wondering, is this worth it? All this effort just to do things like superscript, subscripts, hyperlinks, headings? That's much easier to do just with Google Docs or Microsoft Word, right? And if you're just typing up an essay or just a couple paragraphs for like a blog with just text, then totally you should just consider using something else besides Quarto, like Google Docs or Microsoft Word, right? This probably is not worth the effort if that's all you're doing. The real power from Quarto comes from the ability to integrate simple text like this with executable code all in a single document. That facilitates more reproducible analyses because we have the code and the written explanations of the results all in one spot, so that somebody can follow our workflow from start to finish more easily, right? This is better than like the old-fashioned way when I was a student, say about 10 years ago, where we would use code to make visualizations and then copy and paste them into a Word document and then type up our responses or our explanations of what the visualization showed, or summary tables that we got from code we would copy and paste into Word. There's kind of like some disconnected parts in that workflow. It's not the most continuous or self-contained. So Quarto allows us to have a more reproducible and efficient workflow here. So let's see how we can include a code chunk. So for a basic code chunk, we could do something like including R code to calculate square root of 49 using the sqrt function. Okay. Okay, how exciting. So we can copy this R code here. And one way to include a code chunk here in Quarto is to use this green C button, which is like add new code chunk. If you click the arrow there, you'll notice that there's several options for programming languages that we can use in code chunks. You can actually include Python code chunks in Quarto documents, or Bash or Julia, SQL. We're only going to be using R this semester. Okay. And so what happens when you include a code chunk is you get these three backticks. Again, that button to the left of the one on your keyboard, an open curly brace, a little R signifying, hey, this is going to be the R programming language that we're using in this code chunk, and then a closing curly bracket. Okay. We put the content or the code in between this top line here, these three backticks, and these closing three backticks. Okay. Now, when we render our report, by default, this will execute this code and show us that code along with its result. Okay, so here we get the code and then the result, 7. Line 38 here has executable R code. Note that line 37, which is colored in green, is what we call a comment. So this is something that's not unique to R. Many programming languages have what we call comments. These are pieces of code that do not execute or do anything functionally. They just serve as a note to our future self or others reading this code to help better understand it. It's good practice to have comments throughout your R code, because it's surprisingly easy to forget exactly what code is doing, especially as you get more complex code blocks, even just a week or two later. So it's good practice to help your future self or others. So clicking that green C button is one way to include a code chunk in a Quarto document. You can also use a keyboard shortcut, Control Alt I if you're on a Windows machine, or Command Alt I if you're on a Mac. It just saves a little bit of time. Um, but not always necessary to do. The green plus button works just fine here. Okay. All right. I would not recommend manually typing in the code chunk option, the code blocks, because that can be tedious and prone to errors. If you accidentally add a space in here or have one too many or one too few backticks, that can cause issues with your code chunks. Okay. All right. So let's include a new code chunk at the bottom of our document here and include this special comment at the top of the code chunk. Okay. This is what we call a code chunk option or a code chunk, yeah, code chunk option. Okay. Here what we're doing is we are labeling this code chunk for organizational purposes, calling this code chunk uptown-chunk. If we click on this little button down here in our studio, when you have a Quarto document, it shows you the headers that you can jump to in your document, and it also shows you all the code chunks, which are automatically numbered. By default, code chunks do not have names, but you can name them, which is best practice for organizational purposes. To be honest, I don't have the best habit of doing this, but it is a good habit to have if you can uh, tend to do that. So label allows you to give that code block a name. Now in this code chunk, what we're going to do is we're going to include an external image using the include underscore graphics function from the knitr package. So one way to include or to call a function from an R package is to use the syntax package name colon function name. Okay. There's no package called package name. There's no function called function name here, but just to show that's the syntax we're going to use. Okay, in this case, we're calling the include graphics function from the knitr package. Okay. And we're doing this including an external image. Okay, and so inside include graphics, we give a file path, or in this case, a URL, which we can copy right here from the Google Doc, enclosed in quotes. Okay, so it's important it's enclosed in double quotes here. It should then show up as green. Okay, if we render this, okay, we'll see the result of this code block here. Okay, and you'll see that Bruno Mars joins us, who is also a known avid R programmer. He really loves programming in R, surprisingly. No, that's probably not true, but could be. We don't know for sure. All right. So the label code chunk option is one way we can specify code chunk options in code blocks in our Quarto documents. There's a large number of possible code chunk options you can use to customize the behavior of code chunks. So I go over here some of the most common ones you'll encounter. The eval code chunk option controls whether or not code is evaluated or compiled in that code block. Eval has a default value of true. Echo controls whether or not that code is displayed in the output report. Echo has a default value of true, but you could hide the code if you set echo to be false. So for example, here we can say pound pipe symbol echo false. Okay, so it needs to be all lowercase. The spacing is sensitive. So you have to match this exactly. You have to be very careful with the capitalization and the spacing. But once you have this, this says do not show the code, but still execute this code chunk when we render. So now you can see that image is still included, but we do not have the code showing anymore. Okay. Include can suppress code from being shown and any output from a code chunk. So note that code chunks can sometimes produce warnings or error messages as well, in addition to the code or the output they produce, like a visualization. By setting include to false, you can suppress anything being shown about a code chunk, whether it's a warning message, an informational message, the code itself, okay, or any output from it. Warning has a default value of true, meaning that warnings are shown by default, but you can suppress those by setting this to false. There's sometimes R functions will display informational messages if the developer of that function thinks there's something you should know. So you can set message to false if you don't want to see those. Okay. An important code chunk option is error. So by default, when Quarto hits a syntax error in your code, it will halt the compiling of your report. That can pose a problem if, say, you're completing a homework assignment, you have 10 parts to it, and maybe you feel like you have 9 of the parts correct, but one of the parts in the middle, maybe like question 3, you have an error on. So you still want to show the other 9 parts that are correct, but Quarto is halting and the compilation of the whole document, not giving you anything, no output report if there's a single syntax error anywhere in the document. Okay. By setting error to be true, okay, it actually has a default value of false, meaning it will not keep compiling if it hits an error. You can change error to have a value of true for a code chunk, and that will say, hey, still keep compiling after this, even if there was an error here, just print the error message in the output report. So for example, I'm going to write bad code here that has a syntax error. So note that you'll want to get rid of this after we type it. Okay, you don't want to have a syntax error in your code. It could cause you a headache, right? But if we tried to do something like calculate the square root of the string GVSU, okay, you can get a preview of what this is going to show here by running this just a single code chunk using this green triangle. Okay, that gives an error. We can render the document to see what this does by default. Okay, so by default, it halts executing the report. It's not updated at all. Okay, it's just where it was last compiled from. It just stops here, does not give us the report. Okay, but if we had set error to being true as a code chunk option, and then we render the document, what happens is it still prints the error for us. Okay. But now it just shows us that error message, but keeps on still compiling the full report for us. So that can be very helpful for homework assignments. So let's get rid of this bad code that has a syntax error. We don't want to keep that floating around in here. All right. So we already saw how we can modify the echo argument code chunk option in the uptown chunk code chunk. Let's also play around with include and eval. Okay, so you can say eval false. So maybe you might want to show your R code with echo set to true, but not have it actually execute by setting eval to false. Most commonly, you would do that if you're making like a blog post or teaching, showing what R code would do. So maybe you want to say like, hey, here's this R code you can use, but you don't want it to execute. Maybe for some reason you just want to display it. Typically, though, you want your code to evaluate. Now, note that include being set to false will essentially override the behavior of echo being set to true. Okay, so even though echo being set to true says, hey, show the R code, if you have include also set to false, include is like higher up in the hierarchy. It's stronger than the echo argument. So it will suppress, include suppresses anything being showed about this code chunk. Okay, so like here, notice what happened is that eval was still set to true. So what happened is RStudio still fetched or grabbed this image from online, downloaded it, um, but then include suppressed anything being shown about that image in our report. Okay, so kind of an odd thing to do. You typically wouldn't want to execute the code just to grab an image and then hide it. This wouldn't really make sense to do, but just note that that's what happened here. So we'll just set include to be true. That makes more sense. So now we show the code, we evaluate it, and we include everything about it. We don't suppress things. All right. So there's more code chunk options you can check out here. There's a very large number of them. So in my experience, it's hard to be familiar with most or all of them. But typically what you might do, just look them up as you need them. Okay. And then the ones that you'll tend to use more often, you'll get a little more familiar with. All right. So I mentioned before how having the error code chunk option being set to true is ideal for your homework assignments or other assignments in a course. Instead of having to specify error being set to true for every single code chunk in your document, we can change the default code chunk option value for your entire document by using different fields in the YAML. Okay, so in particular, within this execute portion of the YAML, we can set default values for different code chunk options. Okay, so here we're setting the default value for eval to be true. That's already the default value anyways. Echo being set to true, but here we're suppressing warnings by default and suppressing messages by default. So note that you can still override these code chunk options in an individual code chunk, okay, just by setting the code chunk options manually like this. So you can have a default specified in the YAML, but then still override that behavior for just one code chunk like this. Okay, you can totally do that. So let's copy this YAML. Okay. The YAML is very particular with tabs and spacing, so you want to be very cautious with it. My best advice is to copy out someone's working YAML from online and then use it as your own. Okay. So introduction to Quarto with the author name being Andrew Delernia. Okay, or your own name, of course. And so we saw before how the error code chunk option is really helpful. We can set error to have a default value of true for our whole document by using this execute portion of the YAML. Okay. Now, if we render this, okay, we're also getting the date dynamically for the current date based on your system. Okay. All right. Okay. So next, let's look at how we can include visualizations or plots directly in our Quarto reports. So to do so, we're going to consider this toy dataset, this practice dataset on storms or hurricanes between 1975 and 2021 from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. So we're going to copy this R code here. Okay. And we're going to load the tidyverse R package. Okay, so R packages are collections of R code that others have bundled up and made available for people to use. So when you load a package with the library function in R, it makes all the functions and data sets contained in this R package available to you now. When coding in R, base R or core R comes with a minimal amount of R packages and functions available, just sort of this base level capabilities of R are ready out of the box. When you want to install additional R packages that people have made, like the tidyverse, you can either, if you have like a yellow banner that pops up after you save your document, if you have a library command somewhere in your Quarto report and you save your document, if RStudio recognizes you don't have that R package already installed, it will pop up a yellow banner that says like, hey, do you want to click to install this? That's one way to install an R package is just clicking that banner that pops up. You can also manually, if you don't already have the R package installed, you can manually type install.packages in your console. Okay, and you only want to do this if you do not have the package installed. Okay, if this code runs without an error, okay, this ran without an error, you don't need to install the tidyverse package. Okay, it's already good to go. It's already installed. You only want to install an R package once. It's a one-time thing. Okay, so in install packages, you put the package name in quotes. Okay, and so package name is not a real R package, but you would put like the tidyverse if you wanted to install the tidyverse package. Okay, and then if you hit enter in the console, that's one way we can install an R package. Right, but we don't need to do that here. We already have the tidyverse available. So here in this code, we are making a scatter plot using the ggplot function and geopoint, which ironically looks somewhat like Florida. This data set is on hurricanes, so kind of one of the most hurricane affected states. But just a coincidence. Um, so when we render this, okay, you'll see we have the R code and then the result of that R code, this visualization that's included directly in our report. Okay. Some other code chunk options we can play around with when we have visualizations are out-height, which controls the height of the output graphic, out-width for the width, and then fig-align for the alignment, which can be either left, centered, or right aligned. So let's check out these values. Okay, so for example, out-height. Okay, we could say maybe we want this to be like uh, 500 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Okay. And then maybe we want like the width, maybe we want it to be a little bit wider. So maybe like 700 pixels. Okay. And so if we render this, we can see what this looks like in the output report here. Okay, we get this visualization that's slightly wider than it is tall. You could see, in the extreme, you could make it like really, really short. This wouldn't be a good thing to do, but 50 pixels high, 700 pixels wide. You can see how that looks. Okay, we get this really scrunched, squished scatter plot. It doesn't look good, right? Um, Probably something like 250, 350 looks better. So this is a way you can manually play around with the dimensions of graphics to get them to look better or more ideal for your report, right? Okay. By default, notice the graphic is left aligned. We can change that by using fig-align, and we can say center or centering it. This does not work by default for Word documents if you're rendering to Word, but for HTML it works just fine. Okay, we get a centered graphic here. Notice that I used pixels. You can also specify figure dimensions in millimeters, inches, or centimeters as well by using mm for millimeters, in for inches, cm for centimeters. Okay. All right. So that's the basics of including images or graphics directly in a Quarto report. Another powerful aspect about Quarto reports is how we can use what's called inline R code. So inline R code allows us to have little pieces of executable code directly in sentences or text outside of code chunks. They're kind of like really basic mini code chunks where we just always have like only basic R code to just include a number or a word dynamically based on results, typically. Okay, so for example, um, if we have a code chunk where we define an object called x bar, and for the sample mean, and then we have another object we create called SE for the standard error, we can include those in a code chunk. Okay. With inline R code, okay, we can dynamically include results or numbers in our sentence based on these objects. Okay, so maybe it's based on an analysis of a data set. Here, there's two pieces of R code, inline R code, one here and one here. The inline R code only goes outside of code chunks, and it starts with a single backtick and it's closed with a single backtick. Okay, so here's the inline R code. This little lowercase r is saying, hey, this is going to be the R programming language here. Okay, so it would say Python all lowercase if you wanted to use Python, for example, with inline Python code, but we're not doing that this semester. We're just only focusing on R. Then what happens is after the lowercase r and a space, you give R code that will be executed. Okay, in this case, we already ran this. Okay, we created those objects in our environment. We can see what this will evaluate to in the console. So what's going to happen is this minus 0.548 is going to dynamically replace this when we render or compile our report. And same with this. This will evaluate to a number. So what we see here when we render this, here's the raw markdown or raw Quarto document. And if we look at the compiled report, we can see that the numbers are dynamically included in the text. This can be very helpful if you have calculations that are based on, say, like a table of data, a data set, and you're referring to numbers or results of that analysis of that data set in sentences in your report. So for example, again, that first project I had in grad school where I was helping analyze some data from a genetics study from a collaborator who was a professor in genetics, right? I was using Quarto to make that report for them, and we were working on a manuscript, a publication, analyzing this genetics data, and we had all kinds of results, like pages and pages of results of analyzing this data with visualizations. And, we would state things like the sample mean for this group was this, the sample mean for the other group was this. And I remember I was very much in the habit of using inline R code, right? When I referred to numbers that were based on the data set. And then a few months into the project, it was like, oh, by the way, we had a little extra money, so we collected a little more data. The data set's been updated. Can you redo the report for me with the updated table? And so fortunately, because I was using inline R code, right, all I had to do was update the R code that imported and analyzed the data, and then recompile the report. And when you recompile, then all the inline R code spots automatically update. So you don't accidentally miss numbers in your report being updated or other things like that. So it can be very helpful for efficiency and reducing mistakes. All right, so one more thing we'll talk about for what we can do with Quarto is include nicely formatted tables in our Quarto reports. So there's a few ways we can nicely include tables in our Quarto documents. Okay. Here what we're going to do is look at this summary table showing the four largest recorded wind speeds from this storms data set. Okay, so this R code grabs those, creates a table that has those four largest wind speeds here. Yeah, so if we run this code interactively, we can see it creates this table in our environment pane. You can click on it if you wanted to look at it. Okay, we just have Hurricane Allen, which had a maximum wind speed recorded in knots of 165. Okay, it's kind of similar to miles per hour, so you can see it's very strong winds. All right, we just want to display this little table nicely in our Quarto report, just for demonstration purposes. But slice max allowed us to get those four largest wind speeds. So one way we can nicely include tables in our Quarto document, the oldest way is using the knitr package. And in particular, the cable function from the knitr package. Cable from knitr package. So Quarto's predecessor, or the tool that was originally made for reproducible reports like this with R, was called R Markdown. Quarto is intended to supersede or replace R Markdown for the most part. When R Markdown first came out, which I believe was around 2012, one of the earliest packages for nicely displaying tables was the knitr package, okay, which had this function called cable. So the reason we'll cover this here, it's one of the oldest functions for including tables in R reports and Quarto reports. But because it's been around so long, it's not surprising to see it used in other people's code. So we're more going over it here just to understand what that does. Okay, so here we can just do this. Nicely display this table. Okay, we get this preview. Preview sometimes looks very different than the compiled report. So let's just render this to see what this looks like. Okay, so when you're rendering to HTML, cable looks like this. It's got these bold headers, striped rows in the table, which is kind of nice. It spans the width of the container you've got for your HTML document, for your window. Okay, there's some nice aspects about it. It doesn't look the worst. And honestly, for being, one of the more older, one of the older functions, it looks pretty good. But there's more modern methods for nicely including tables in R, which we'll cover here. So I would not recommend using cable moving forward. Okay, better options, because for example, cable does not look as consistent from HTML to say Word. Okay, here's a cable table made with Word. You'll notice it looks very different. Yeah, we'll go over some better options with Flex Table and the GT package here. Okay. First, one thing we can talk about is how to include a table caption such that we have a numbered table. Okay, it's automatically numbered. We can do that using these special code chunk options, label and TBL-cap. Okay. In order to have an automatically numbered table in Quarto, you need to have the label start with TBL- for that code chunk. You can have anything after TBL-, but TBL- is saying, hey, we're going to have a numbered table in here. Okay. And then TBL-cap includes a caption that will automatically get a table numbering next to it. Okay, so for example, here we can see, we can label this like cable table. Okay, a table made with cable, or let's see what it's a lot of rhyming. Let's see. Oh, okay. Yeah, let's call this storm summary statistics with cable. Let's call it that. We can match the activity. So here's the code chunk options. If we render this, okay, what this is going to do is say table one. Okay, it automatically gave it a numbered table and then puts the caption that we specified here. Okay. You don't have to number a table like this or give it a label if you include a table in Quarto with RStudio, but it's just an option. So now let's do the same thing, but using the flex table function from the flex table package. This is a more modern um, package for including tables nicely in Quarto documents or R Markdown documents. Main benefits of a flex table are that it looks remarkably consistent across Word, HTML, and PDF output formats. Okay. So here we're going to make a flex table. Make sure you update the label. Code chunk option here to say flex table. Let's say flex table. And then the R package is called flex table. And sometimes developers, when they make an R package, if they have one function that is like the main thing people use when they load that R package, sometimes they call the package the same thing as the function name. It's kind of like when you have an album that an artist release and then they name the album after the main song that people will want from that album, right? So here's how Flex Table looks. It's a little basic, but like I said, remarkably consistent. Um, Flex Table is not the best if you're rendering to HTML documents, just because there's a better package called GT for making nice looking tables in HTML documents. But Flex Table is quite nice, and its strengths are that you can do more complex styling, like highlighting different fonts, coloring of text, coloring of cells, things like that. Even if you're rendering to Word documents with Flex Table. So Flex Table is great. Essentially, if you're rendering to Microsoft Word, Flex Table is one of the most powerful packages for nice looking tables. Okay, but HTML, you're better off using the GT package. Okay, so for GT, this is the best R package for HTML documents. Similar to Flex Table, the GT package has its main function being the GT function. So the name of the function is the same as the name of the package. Doesn't have to be in general though. So we'll update. It's important to update this label code chunk option. RStudio or Quarto will not like if you have duplicated code chunk names. If you have the same value for label across multiple code chunks, it won't like that. Okay, it'll give you, I believe it gives you an error. So here we're using GT. Okay, so if we render this, we'll see what the GT table looks like when rendering to HTML here. Okay. And oh, could not find function GT. Did I forget? Oh, need to update library to say GT. Let's render this. All right. So here's how GT looks by default. You'll notice we get this automatic increments for the table numbering. Okay, GT stripes the table rows as well. And you can do further customizations to the GT table, like bolding of headers, using hierarchical headers, more complex things with the GT package and other helper art packages. But that's the basics of nicely including tables with R. You'll see how GT, here's how it looks when rendering to HTML, whereas here's how it looks when you render to Microsoft Word. So not exactly the same. It's more inconsistent than Flex Table, whereas here's Flex Table when rendering to Word. Here's Flex Table when rendering to HTML. Okay, so Flex Table is more consistent, but across different formats. But GT is really great and arguably the best package when you're rendering to HTML format. Other things we can do with tables. So you can customize individual um, aspects about tables like header coloring, cell coloring for the text, or background coloring manually. There's ways to do that manually. If you want to just apply pre-bundled sets of aesthetic or visual customizations about tables, you can use what are called complete themes. So like here, for example, this is the Tron theme, okay, which applies this look to the flex table table here. Okay, so for table themes, table themes, we can apply this Tron theme. Okay. And that works out of the box. The Tron theme is available when you have loaded the Flex Table R package. Okay. And that works whether you're rendering to Word or HTML. Okay. With GT, the GT package does not have complete themes ready out of the box, so we have to install and load an additional R package in order to use complete themes with GT tables. In particular, the GT Extras package is the main, most common R package for doing that. Okay, so if we include the GT Extras package, you may need to install this prior to loading it. Okay, you get this theme for like the New York Times. Okay, it kind of matches tables that are commonly found in New York Times articles. Okay, we can render that. Doop, doop. We can see it's working on rendering this still. Hmm, it's taking a little bit longer. Maybe I'll hit render again, see if that works better. Oh, connection timeout. Maybe I'll hit. There we go. Okay. So here we have this New York Times themed table, which is remarkably similar to the original table, but it is a little different. Okay. So try on your own to include your own theme for a GT table and a flex table. We're only going to do it for flex table and GT here. There is a package for complete themes for cable tables, but we're not going to do that here because, like I mentioned, cable's such a dated method for including tables. I more just wanted to make you aware of it, since others will use it in their code potentially that you see. But yeah, go ahead and pause this video here. Try this out on your own first, and then resume it, and we'll look at it together. All right. Hopefully you had time to try that on your own. So let's consider this U try. part one. Then we've got part two. Okay, part one, we're going to use the GT package and GT extras package to make a table. Maybe we can include this hyperlink here. Just using some markdown styling here. All right. Okay. So for complete themes from GT, you can see they have a number of themes available. ESPN's a popular one people tend to like. Got the New York Times. 538, rest in peace, used to be a data analytics organization within or owned by Disney, founded by Nate Silver, one of the most famous statisticians from our great state of Michigan. Um, yeah, let's look at that ESPN theme. So GT theme, ESPN. That's always fun. So we include that code here. You can use GT theme. You'll notice sometimes if our studio is behaving nicely, it'll give you this tab to complete option for function names. So we can do ESPN. And then for flex table, I'm a bit of a Star Wars nerd myself. So if you look at the options at flex table, and that flex table has, okay, they have a theme Vader for the Sith Lord from Star Wars universe. So let's try that one out. That's kind of fun. And let's render that. So we got this ESPN Vader theme. Almost there. It's just getting a little bit slow to compile, I guess. Okay, fresh it there. All right, so there's our ESPN theme. Looks really similar to the New York Times theme, if you ask me. But it is a little different. And then we have this Vader theme for Flex table. So kind of fun. So those are the main aspects about Quarto that are important for making Quarto reports this semester. I want to note that there's lots more you can do with Quarto. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Um, so, for example, if you consider how we can use inline R code to dynamically update numbers in reports, or code chunks to dynamically include visualizations, these are ways in which we can make reports that are dynamic and adapt to data sets being updated. It can be particularly helpful if you have periodic reports that you need to publish. Okay, so lots of organizations have things like this. So when I was in undergrad for my studying statistics and math, I did an internship at the U.S. Department of Agriculture in their statistics division, right? So East Lansing, Michigan has like a regional headquarters for the whole Great Lakes region for the National Agricultural Statistics Service, NASS, which is a sub-organization of the Department of Agriculture. Um, so if you look at like the NASS website in Michigan, one thing I remember is that we would have all kinds of weekly or periodic reports that we would have to publish. And so these reports would always be in the same exact structure, but have new data sets that were for that given week. Okay, so for example, crop weather, crop progress and condition was a periodic report that would describe aspects about the weather for that week. Okay, so actually I'll go to a little later one that's more like closer to the summer. So let's say like May 12th. Okay, there we go. Um, well, maybe we'll just go to a previous year. Okay, let's go to 2024. There we go. Okay, June 10th. There we go. Okay, so this crop weather report in the summer would generally follow this structure where we would have like a description of field crops, a description of fruit conditions, and then some graphics, some visualizations describing um, data aggregated from surveying farmers in the state of Michigan regarding conditions of different crops, right? So an important aspect about the Department of Agriculture was tallying up how much crops we have of different things and how it was looking for the year. Okay. And so the data would come in the same structure every week, and then we would pass this around the office with like several statisticians. Somebody would make this table, somebody would make this bar chart here, somebody would write up this field crops section, and then we'd make sure the date was updated up here in the banner. This was incremented by one, right, for the Michigan crop weather report, but we always had the logo here, USDA logo, agriculture counts logo here, and it would always say Michigan crop weather. Right, so there's some aspects that are always the same, like the footer here. Okay. This took always a considerable amount of time. Oh, somebody accidentally forgot to bold the C here. That's funny. Um, this always took a considerable amount of time, multiple statisticians passing this around the office, right? But I remember after leaving there and learning about our Markdown and Quarto, how you can use that for reproducible analyses, I couldn't help but think about how like these reports could use inline R code, say here and here, or inline R code here to dynamically update numbers in the text each week with the when the data set got updated. You could use code chunks to update these graphics, right? And then what's cool about Quarto, another cool aspect about Quarto is you can use what are called Word document templates, which are great for things like this, where you have a very particularly styled Word document where you want to say like, oh, I want to make a Word document with Quarto, but I want this to be the header, right? I want it to have a big title with this font family, the USDA logo right here. I want this to be the footer, right? You can do that using these Word document templates, which you specify in the YAML. Okay, we won't have to do this semester at all, but I just wanted to point out that this is available because it's a great resource. So essentially, you can point in the YAML, you can point to a current Word document that is properly constructed with this styling. Okay, and you have to do that in a special way to make sure it can be used in that way. But then what happens is if you have a Quarto document, you can have it have custom um, styles or themes to this that will reflect a particular like header, font family, things like that. Okay, so something like that, Quarto documents with template Word documents would have saved an incredible amount of time at, say, this USDA NAS office. And lots of other organizations have similar periodic reports that they produce as well. So that's something else you can do. You can make Word documents like this. Word document was made only with Quarto. Okay, and there's even a Quarto cheat sheet that shows you many more things you can do as well. If you're curious, okay, you can check that out. Um, if you want to customize the overall theme of HTML documents you make with Quarto, you can do this using the YAML as well. So by default, this is what HTML Quarto document looks like, but you can kind of slightly customize the look of this. Um, let's see, like Yeti. Okay, so this is an HTML argument, so I believe you go here, Yeti. Let's see if I did that right. You have to be careful with the tabbing and the spaces in the YAML because it's very sensitive to that. But if you get that just right, Yeah, Yeti looks very similar. Okay. Many of these Quarto themes look very similar to the original, but um, you don't have to use those. Those are optional. Can be fun if you want to explore different ones that are available out there. Okay. So that's it for this activity. Here's some bonus parts that are optional to try out on your own if you're curious. But otherwise, uh, that's it for this introduction to Quarto. Thanks.